The words cut deeper than any knife could. "I expected more from you. What a disappointment." My mother's voice was low, controlled, meant only for me as we stood in our caps and gowns, surrounded by celebrating families. It was supposed to be the proudest day of my life, graduating with honors in computer science from a prestigious university. But instead of celebration, I got contempt. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Little did she know that 10 years later, I'd be sitting across from her at Riverfront Financial, sliding a folder across the mahogany table that contained the deed to her mortgage. The look on her face when she realized I now owned the roof over her head? That moment was worth every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every tear I'd shed getting there. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about truth, healing, and what happens when you finally stand up and demand respect. "Smile, Ethan." My father Marcus raised his camera, his forced enthusiasm almost painful to witness. I fixed my graduation cap, standing beside my mother Vivian, who had already smoothed her designer dress 3 times in the last 5 minutes. The May sun beat down on the university quad, making the polyester gown stick to my skin. But the real discomfort came from the cold distance radiating from the woman beside me. For 4 years, I'd pulled all-nighters, maintained a 3.9 GPA, secured a prestigious internship that led to a job offer, and even delivered the student address at the honors ceremony. Yet as families around us embraced with tears of joy and pride, my mother's lips remained pressed in a thin line, her eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for someone more interesting. "We should head to the restaurant," she said, checking her watch. "I told the Wilsons we'd meet them by 2, and you know how traffic gets." "Just one more by the fountain, Viv," my father insisted, always the peacemaker. "It's not every day our son graduates summa cum laude." "Cum laude," she corrected sharply, though she was wrong. "And the Wilsons' daughter Emily graduated from Yale Law. Now that's an achievement worth celebrating." I stood there, diploma case in hand, the weight of $300,000 in student loans on my shoulders. Loans I'd insisted on taking myself because I didn't want to hear about the sacrifice my parents were making for the next 20 years. "Actually, Mom, it's summa cum laude," I said quietly. "Top 1%. She adjusted her pearl necklace, barely glancing at me. "Well, I expected more from you. What a disappointment." Her voice was low enough that my father couldn't hear as he fidgeted with the camera settings, but the words landed like a physical blow. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked, heat rising to my face. "Emily Wilson is starting at Morgan Stanley next month. 6 figures, Ethan. Your computer job at that startup? What was it again? Coding websites? It's hardly the career path we envisioned when we sent you to college." I stared at her, suddenly seeing with perfect clarity the pattern that had defined our relationship for 22 years. Nothing I did would ever be good enough. Not my grades, not my achievements, not my career choice, nothing. In her eyes, I would always fall short of some impossible standard that seemed to shift whenever I got close to meeting it. "You didn't send me anywhere, Mom. I earned my way here. Every scholarship, every grant, every loan, that was all me." "Don't be dramatic, Ethan. We've always supported you." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Though perhaps if you'd chosen a more practical major like business or law, we'd have more to show for it." My father rejoined us, oblivious to the tension. "Ready for that fountain picture?" "Actually," I said, removing my cap, "I think I'm done with pictures. I'll meet you both at the restaurant." "Ethan," my mother hissed, grabbing my arm, "don't make a scene. What will people think?" There it was, her perpetual concern. Not how I felt on my graduation day, but how things appeared to others. The perfect family image she'd cultivated for years, the successful real estate agent with her accountant husband, and their high-achieving son. It was all a facade that I'd helped maintain through years of silent compliance. I don't know, Mom. Maybe they'll think your son finally stood up for himself. I gently removed her hand from my arm. I'll see you at Harborview in an hour. As I walked away through the crowd of celebrating families, I could feel her eyes burning into my back. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from my best friend. Zoe, you did it. Meet at the oak tree in 10, champagne waiting. For the first time that day, I smiled genuinely. Zoe Chen had been my rock through college, the one person who saw me for who I really was rather than who she thought. I should be. I texted back a quick, on my way, and changed direction toward the ancient oak where we'd studied countless hours together. Zoe waited with a bottle of cheap champagne and plastic cups, her own graduation gown unzipped to reveal jeans and a faded t-shirt underneath. Her parents had flown back to Shanghai the previous day, unable to extend their trip for the actual ceremony. There he is, the coding genius. She popped the cork with practiced ease. To futures so bright we need sunglasses. I clinked my plastic cup against hers, the sweet bubbles a stark contrast to the bitter taste my mother's words had left. Thanks for being here, Zoe. She studied my face, her smile fading slightly. Vivian strike again? How'd you guess? I took another swig of champagne. Because you have that look, the one where you're calculating exactly how many miles you can put between yourself and Lakeside Heights. She sat on the grass, patting the spot beside her. What was it this time? According to my mother, I'm a disappointment because I'm not Emily Wilson starting at Morgan Stanley. I dropped down next to her, stretching my legs out on the grass. Emily Wilson? The one who cheated on that econ final last year? Zoe rolled her eyes. Your mom needs to update her role models. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching other graduates rush by with their families. You know what's weird? I said finally. Part of me still wants her approval. After everything, some stupid part of me still thinks if I just achieve enough, she'll finally be proud. That's not weird, that's human, Zoe replied. But Ethan, I've watched you chase her approval for 4 years. When does it end? I swirled the remaining champagne in my cup, considering her question. Today, I said with sudden certainty. It ends today. Yeah? Zoe looked skeptical but hopeful. I got the offer from Westridge Tech last week. I'm taking it. Her eyes widened. The one in Seattle, 3,000 miles from here. I finished my champagne. I haven't told my parents yet. Your mom's going to flip. Probably. I shrugged. But for once, I don't care. I'm done living my life for her approval. Little did I know then how prophetic those words would be, or how completely my relationship with my mother would transform over the next decade. As I sat under that oak tree with Zoe, I couldn't have imagined the path that lay ahead, the discoveries, the betrayals, and ultimately, the reckoning that would change everything. I did meet my parents at Harborview Restaurant that afternoon. The tense lunch that followed was a preview of the next 10 years of our relationship. Strained phone calls on holidays, brief visits that ended in arguments, and the growing distance that comes when you realize a parent's love is conditional. But that moment under the oak tree was the first time I chose myself, my own path. It was the day I stopped being the son my mother wanted and started becoming the man I needed to be. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And though I didn't know it yet, it was also the first step toward that moment 10 years later, when I'd slide a mortgage deed across a table and watch my mother's carefully constructed world crumble around her. 7 years after graduation, I found myself back in Lakeside Heights for my grandfather's funeral. I hadn't planned to stay longer than the weekend, but when I arrived at my grandfather's modest house to help clear out his belongings, I discovered something that changed Everything. Dad, do you know what these are? I held up a stack of envelopes I'd found in my grandfather's desk, all addressed to me in his shaky handwriting, all unopened and marked, "Return to sender." My father looked up from the box of photographs. He was sorting through, his face clouding with confusion. I've never seen those before. I flipped through the envelopes, birthday cards, Christmas cards, letters, all spanning my college years and beyond. They're all addressed to my dorm or my apartments after college. Why would they all be returned? My father took one of the envelopes, examining the "Return to sender" stamp. This doesn't make sense. Your grandfather asked about you constantly. He was so proud of everything you were doing. I never heard from him after I left for college, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Mom told me he was upset that I moved so far away instead of working for the family business. Something shifted in my father's expression, a fleeting look of discomfort that I might have missed if I hadn't been watching closely. Your mother handled most of the family correspondence, he said carefully. Dad, I said slowly, did Mom intercept these? He returned to his box of photographs, suddenly very interested in a picture of my childhood baseball team. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. But his non-answer was answer enough. I tore open one of the envelopes dated from my sophomore year of college. Inside was a birthday card with a check for $500 and a note. Ethan, so proud of your SOAR. Dean's List achievement. Call anytime. I miss our talks. Love, Grandpa. My hands trembled as I opened another, then another. Each contained similar messages of pride, support, and often financial gifts that I'd never received. The most recent was dated just 3 months before his death. Ethan, heard about your promotion at Westridge. Your grandmother would have been so proud to see the man you've become. I've enclosed something to help with that house down payment. You mentioned wanting to save for. Love always, Grandpa. Inside was a check for $25,000. I sat heavily in my grandfather's worn leather chair, the evidence of my mother's betrayal spread across the desk before me. She kept us apart, I whispered. All these years. My father sighed deeply, setting down the photographs. Your grandfather didn't approve of how your mother managed the family. They argued before you left for college. About what? About you, mostly. He thought she was too hard on you, too controlling. He threatened to change his will, to leave his share of the family business directly to you instead of to her. He rubbed his temples. I should have said something when the birthday card stopped coming, but your mother insisted he was just being stubborn. I carefully gathered the envelopes, a cold clarity settling over me. What else has she kept from me, Dad? He wouldn't meet my eyes. You should talk to your Aunt Olivia. Mom's sister? I frowned. I haven't seen her since I was a kid. Mom always said they had a falling out. That's one way of putting it, my father replied, his voice uncharacteristically bitter. Olivia lives in Pine Valley now. Maybe you should pay her a visit before you head back to Seattle. The next day, I drove to Pine Valley, a working-class neighborhood about 30 minutes from my parents' upscale suburb. Aunt Olivia's modest bungalow was surrounded by flower beds in full bloom, a stark contrast to my mother's manicured but sterile landscaping. Olivia opened the door before I could knock, as if she'd been watching for me. Ethan, she breathed, her eyes, so similar to my mother's but warmer, filling with tears. You look so much like your grandmother. She pulled me into a hug that felt like coming home, though I barely remembered her. Inside, the house was cluttered but cozy, filled with books and art and family photographs, including several of me at various ages. How did you get these? I asked, picking up a framed photo of my college graduation, a ceremony I'd been certain she hadn't attended. I have my sources, she smiled, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. Your brother Noah sends me updates when he can, and I At your graduation, though I stayed at the back. I didn't want to cause a scene with your mother. What happened between you two? I asked, accepting the coffee. Mom would never talk about it. Olivia settled into an armchair, tucking her feet beneath her. Did you know your grandmother left me her jewelry collection? Family heirlooms, including her engagement ring. Vivian was furious. She'd always assumed those would be hers. After the funeral, she came to my house and demanded I hand everything over. That sounds like Mom, I said dryly. When I refused, she threatened to cut me off from the family, from you kids especially. She said if I ever tried to contact you, she'd make sure you knew I was an unstable, bitter woman trying to poison you against her. Olivia sipped her coffee. I was going through a divorce at the time, struggling financially. I couldn't fight her then, not the way I should have. So, you just stayed away? Not entirely. She set down her mug and crossed to a bookshelf, pulling out a photo album. I sent birthday cards every year, Christmas presents, letters. She handed me the album. I kept copies of everything I sent, knowing Vivian would probably intercept them. I opened the album with a growing sense of dread. Page after page of cards, letters, and photos of gifts sent but never received. 15 years of communication, erased by my mother. There's more, Olivia said quietly. Do you remember the college fund your grandparents started for you? Vaguely, I frowned. Mom said they had to use it for medical bills before they died. Olivia shook her head, anger flashing in her eyes. There was over $100,000 in that account, Ethan. It was in trust, specifically for your education. Your mother somehow got control of it when your grandmother died. I tried to fight it, but the paperwork was very convincing. My mind raced, calculating the student loans I was still paying off. Are you saying she stole my college fund? I'm saying your mother has spent a lifetime making sure she controls the family narrative. And the family money. Olivia reached for my hand. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I should have tried harder to reach you. It's not your fault, I said, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. But I need to understand exactly what happened. Over the next few hours, Olivia filled in the blanks of my family history. The manipulations, the lies, the careful way my mother had isolated me from anyone who might offer a different perspective than hers. By the time I left, I carried not only the weight of these revelations, but also copies of documents Olivia had kept. Trust paperwork, letters, even emails between my mother and the family attorney discussing how to reallocate my inheritance. On the drive back to my hotel, my phone rang. Noah, my younger brother. Dad said you talked to Aunt Olivia, he said without preamble. You knew? I couldn't keep the accusation from my voice. All this time, you knew what Mom was doing? Not all of it, he defended. And not at first. But yeah, the past few years I've pieced things together. It's complicated, being here, seeing it all from the inside. You could have told me. Would you have believed me? He sighed. Mom's very convincing, Ethan. And very thorough. There's more you need to know. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Like what? Like the fact that she's in financial trouble. The real estate market crashed last year, and she made some bad investments trying to recover. Dad's practice is struggling too. What kind of trouble? They're behind on the mortgage. The lake house is already in foreclosure. I recalled my mother's Facebook posts from just weeks earlier. Designer shopping trips, exotic vacations, the perfect life she'd always been so determined to project. Does Dad know how bad it is? Dad's in denial, Noah said flatly. And Mom's too proud to admit she's failing. But I've seen the notices, Ethan. They could lose the house within months. I pulled into the hotel parking lot, mind racing. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserved that college money, and the gifts from Grandpa, and a mother who's proud of you instead of competing with you. He paused. And because I found something in Mom's office last week that you should see. What? Remember that job offer you got right after college? The one in Boston that Mom talked you out of taking because she said it was a failing company? Vertex Systems? I frowned. Yeah, they went under a few months after I declined. Except they didn't. They got acquired by Microsoft for billions. And the stock options they offered you would be worth millions now. How do you know this? Because Mom kept all your offer letters, Noah said quietly. She has a file on you, Ethan. Every achievement, every opportunity, especially the ones she sabotaged. It's like she's been collecting evidence of her control over your life. I sat in stunned silence, the implications washing over me. My entire adult life had been shaped by my mother's manipulations, from the relationships she'd undermined to the career opportunities she'd sabotaged, all to keep me dependent on her approval. I need that file, I said finally. Already copied it, Noah replied. Check your email. After we hung up, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at nothing. The hurt was transforming into something colder, more focused. It wasn't just about the money she'd taken or the relationships she'd severed. It was about the years of manipulation, of making me believe I was never quite good enough, never quite measuring up to her expectations. In that moment, sitting in a hotel parking lot with the ruins of my family's facade strewn around me, I made a decision. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. My mother had spent decades crafting a narrative where she was always in control, always superior. It was time for a new story. The next morning, I called Zoe. I need your financial expertise, I said without preamble when she answered. Good morning to you too, she yawned. It was 3 hours earlier in Seattle. What's so urgent that you're calling at dawn on a Sunday? I want to buy a mortgage. There was a pause. Like, your own mortgage? You're finally looking at houses? No, I said, staring at the ceiling of my hotel room. I want to buy my parents' mortgage from their bank. Another, longer, pause. Ethan, what the hell happened at that funeral? I spent the next half hour explaining everything I'd discovered. The intercepted letters, the stolen college fund, the sabotaged job opportunities, and now my parents' financial troubles. That's a lot, Zoe said when I finished. Are you sure about this? Buying their mortgage is pretty extreme. I don't want to destroy them, Zoe. I just want the truth to come out. I want my mother to face what she's done. And what happens after the truth comes out? Have you thought that far ahead? I hadn't, not really. The revelation was still too fresh, the hurt too raw to see beyond the moment of confrontation I was envisioning. One step at a time, I said finally. First, I need to know if it's even possible. It's possible, she confirmed. Complicated, but possible. Banks sell mortgages all the time, especially troubled ones. With your credit rating and assets, you could probably make them an offer they'd consider. But Ethan, this is a major financial decision, not to mention an emotional minefield. I know. That's why I need your help to do it right. She sighed. Send me all the information you have. I'll see what I can do. But promise me you'll talk to someone about this, a therapist, not just your aunt or brother. This is heavy stuff. I promise, I said, though therapy was the furthest thing from my mind at that moment. And Zoe, thank you. Over the next 3 months, I put my plan into action. I worked with Zoe to make a legitimate offer to my parents' bank for their mortgage, an offer made through a holding company we created specifically for this purpose, ensuring my name wouldn't appear on any paperwork my mother might see. While the financial arrangements proceeded, I met with Jackson, Aunt Olivia's husband, and a corporate attorney. Though initially reluctant to get involved in family matters, he changed his mind after reviewing the documents I'd gathered. This goes beyond family drama, Ethan, he said, tapping the file containing evidence of my mother's financial manipulations. There's potential fraud here, possibly tax evasion. If your goal is simply to confront her with the truth, we might be able to arrange a meeting, a mediation of sorts. That's exactly what I want, I assured him. I don't want to send my mother to jail. I just want her to acknowledge what she's done. Jackson nodded thoughtfully. Then let's approach this strategically. You'll need more than just documents. You'll need witnesses, people who can corroborate your story. Like who? Diane Miller, for one, he suggested. She was your mother's closest friend for years before their falling out. She might know things even Olivia doesn't. I remembered Mrs. Miller vaguely, a warm, soft-spoken woman who had abruptly disappeared from our lives when I was in high school. Do you think she'd talk to me? Only one way to find out. Diane. Miller now lived in a neighboring town, running a small bookshop that smelled of old paper and cinnamon. Her eyes widened when I introduced myself. Ethan Carter, she breathed, reaching out to touch my cheek as if making sure I was real. I've wondered about you for years, how you turned out. You knew me well? I asked, accepting the tea she offered. I was at your christening, she smiled. Your mother and I were inseparable once, until we weren't. Over the next hour, Diane filled in more pieces of the puzzle, how my mother had systematically isolated herself from anyone who challenged her version of reality, how she'd manufactured conflicts to justify cutting people off, how she'd spoken about me when I wasn't around. She was always conflicted about you, Diane said carefully. Proud of your accomplishments on one hand, but threatened by them on the other. She needed you to be successful, but never more successful than her. It was unsettling to witness. Why didn't anyone say anything? I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. All those years, all those adults who must have seen what was happening, why didn't anyone step in? Diane's eyes filled with tears. I tried once. When you were about 16, after your mother sabotaged that summer program at MIT. Wait, what summer program? She paled slightly. You didn't know? You were selected for a prestigious summer science program, full scholarship. Your mother told everyone you'd declined because you weren't interested. Another opportunity stolen. Another piece of my life controlled. After that, Diane continued, I confronted her, told her she was damaging you with her control. She cut me off completely, told mutual friends I'd tried to seduce your father. She twisted her teacup in her hands. It was easier for people to believe that salacious story than to confront the uncomfortable truth about Vivian. Would you be willing to put all this in writing? I asked. And possibly attend a meeting? She hesitated only briefly. Yes. It's long overdue. By the time I returned to Seattle, the foundation of my plan was in place. The mortgage purchase was proceeding through the holding company, Jackson was preparing the legal groundwork for a potential mediation, and I had written statements from both Diane and 2 other former family friends who had experienced similar treatment from my mother. Noah continued to be my inside source, carefully documenting our mother's increasing financial desperation without revealing my involvement. According to him, she'd begun selling off artwork and jewelry while maintaining the appearance of affluence to the outside world. She's planning a big anniversary party next month, he told me during one of our weekly calls. 40 people at Le Cirque. Money she doesn't have to impress people who wouldn't care if they knew the truth. Perfect timing, I replied, checking my calendar. The mortgage transfer would be complete by then. Tell me more about the guest list. The final piece fell into place when my father called me directly, something he rarely did without my mother's knowledge. Your brother mentioned you might be coming home for our anniversary, he said, his voice oddly strained. I'm considering it, I replied carefully. A long pause. Ethan, there's something you should know about your mother, about... Many things. My pulse quickened. I'm listening. Not over the phone. He lowered his voice further. There are documents in my office safe. Things I've kept as insurance, I suppose. The combination is your birthday. Dad, are you okay? For the first time, I wondered if my plan might hurt him as much as it would expose my mother. I've been a coward, he said simply, letting your mother's version of reality become mine because it was easier than fighting. But I'm not sleeping well these days, son. The truth has a way of demanding attention eventually. After we hung up, I called Jackson. We need to move up the timeline. I'm flying home next week. The final preparatory step was perhaps the most difficult. I reached out to my mother directly, something I rarely did. Ethan, what a lovely surprise, she answered, her voice warm and maternal in a way it only was when others might be listening. Are you calling about the anniversary party? Noah mentioned you might attend. I wouldn't miss it, I said, the lie feeling strange on my tongue. In fact, I have some news I'd like to share with everyone. Oh, I could hear the immediate calculation in her voice. A promotion, or have you finally met someone worth bringing home? Always the implication that my choices weren't quite good enough, that I was somehow lacking. It's a surprise, I said, but I think you'll find that interesting. How mysterious, she laughed. Well, we can't wait to see you. It's been too long since you've been home. Home. The word felt hollow now, tainted by everything I'd discovered. Yet as I packed for the trip, a small, childish part of me still hoped for a different outcome than the one I was planning. Some explanation that would make sense of it all. Some recognition from my mother that would heal the wounds of a lifetime. But the folder of evidence on my desk told a different story. The truth rarely arrives as we hope it will. Sometimes it comes like a storm, destroying what was built on lies so something honest can finally grow in its place. Le Cirque glittered, with candlelight and champagne flutes, the perfect backdrop for my mother's carefully orchestrated anniversary celebration. From my corner table, I watched her work the room, her designer dress exactly the right shade of subtle wealth, her laugh calibrated to be heard but not too loud, her hand possessively on my father's arm as they accepted congratulations on 30 years of marriage. 30 years of what, exactly? I wondered, sipping my water. Manipulation? Lies? My father caught my eye across the room and nodded almost imperceptibly. He looked exhausted beneath his social smile, the weight of whatever documents he'd left, in his safe evidently heavy on his conscience. Quite the production, isn't it? Noah murmured, sliding into the chair beside me. Mom outdid herself. You should see the bill. I might be seeing more than that soon, I replied. Is everything set? He nodded. Jackson and Olivia are waiting in the private dining room we reserved. Diane arrived a few minutes ago with the others. They're all ready whenever you are. I checked my watch. The mortgage transfer completed this morning. I have the paperwork in my briefcase. You're really going through with this? It wasn't a question, but I could hear the mixture of apprehension and admiration in my brother's voice. Last chance to back out, I offered. This affects you. 2. Noah's eyes drifted to our mother, now laughing with the mayor's wife. No, it's time. I'm with you. The moment arrived sooner than I expected. My mother clinked her glass, calling for attention to make a toast. As the room quieted, she beamed at my father. 30 years ago, I married the most patient man in the world, she began, prompting appreciative laughter. Together, we've built a beautiful life, raised 2 wonderful sons. Her eyes found me briefly, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them, and created a legacy we're proud of. I stood up, glass in hand. Speaking of legacy, I'd like to add something. A flash of annoyance crossed her face. This wasn't part of her script, but she quickly masked it with a smile. Of course, darling. The floor is yours. First, congratulations. To both of you, I said, raising my glass. 30 years is quite an achievement. The guests murmured in agreement. In fact, I have a special anniversary gift I'd like to present, but it's rather private. Mom, Dad, would you mind joining me in the adjoining room for a moment? Noah, Aunt Olivia, and a few close family friends will join us. My mother's smile froze. Olivia is here? Yes, along with Diane Miller and the Hendersons, I replied calmly. They're waiting to help celebrate this milestone. Her eyes narrowed slightly, calculations visible behind them. How thoughtful, but perhaps after the main celebration. It's quite time-sensitive, I interrupted. It won't take long. My father stepped forward. I think we should see what Ethan has prepared, Vivian. Something in his tone must have alerted her because her expression sharpened. Very well, she said with a tight smile to the room. Please enjoy the dessert course. We'll return shortly. As we moved toward the private dining room, I could see her mind working furiously, trying to identify the threat to regain control of the situation. In her world, unexpected deviations from her script were always threatening. The private room was arranged conference-style, with documents neatly placed at each seat. Aunt Olivia, Jackson, Diane, and 2 other former family friends sat on one side of the table. Empty chairs awaited us on the other. What is this? My mother demanded, stopping in the doorway. Fletcher, did you know about this? Ambush? Please sit down, Vivian, I said, placing my briefcase on the table. This isn't an ambush, it's a reckoning. Her face flushed. How dare you speak to me that way? I am your mother. Yes, I agreed. You are. And we need to talk about what that has meant over the years. I don't have to listen to this. She turned to leave, but my father blocked. The doorway. I think we should hear what Ethan has to say, he said quietly. All of it. The betrayal in her eyes as she looked at him was almost theatrical. Fletcher. Sit down, Vivian, he repeated more firmly this time. Please. Reluctantly, she took a seat, arranging herself with dignified offense, already positioning herself as the victim. I don't know what kind of stunt this is, but... It's not a stunt, Mom, Noah interjected. It's the truth. Finally. I opened my briefcase and removed a folder. For most of my life, I've believed I wasn't good enough, that no matter what I achieved, it somehow fell short of expectations. Your expectations, specifically. What I've recently discovered is that this was by design. I placed my grandfather's returned letters on the table. These were sent to me over the years. You made sure I never received them. That's absurd, she scoffed. Your grandfather barely remembered your birthday. That's a lie, I said flatly. Just like you lied about my college fund. And the summer program at MIT. And the job offer from Vertex Systems. With each accusation, I placed the corresponding evidence before her. Bank statements, the acceptance letter, the job offer with its stock option details. Her strategy shifted instantly, tears welling in her eyes. If this is about money, Ethan, you should have just said so. We've always been willing to help you. This isn't about money, I cut her off. It's about control. It's about how you systematically isolated me from anyone who might influence me differently than you wanted. It's about how you sabotaged opportunities that might have made me truly independent. Diane spoke up then, her voice gentle but firm. Vivian, I've known you for 35 years. I've watched this pattern play out with Ethan, with Olivia, with anyone who threatened your narrative. This is ridiculous, my mother snapped, turning to my father. Fletcher, are you going to sit there and let them attack me like this? My father opened the folder in front of him, removing a stack of papers. I found these in your desk last week, Vivian. Emails between you and Sandra Wilson about how to convince Ethan that the Vertex job was failing. Bank transfers from our joint account to Emily Wilson's father right before he suddenly offered Ethan that advice, about the startup being a dead end. He looked up, eyes tired but resolute. There's more. So much more. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in my mother's eyes. Not the performative worry she'd displayed when I'd made choices she disapproved of, but real, visceral fear of exposure. Mistakes, she said, her voice suddenly small. We all make mistakes as parents. Everything I did was to protect you, to guide you. To control me, I corrected. To make sure I never surpassed you, never escaped your influence. To keep me grateful and dependent. That's not true, she insisted, but the conviction was fading from her voice. It is true, Aunt Olivia said. And it's the same thing you did to me when I inherited Mom's jewelry, the same thing you did to Diane when she questioned your parenting. The same pattern, over and over. My mother's gaze darted around the room, seeking an ally and finding none. Her shoulders straightened, defense mechanism engaging. So you've gathered my enemies to humiliate me on my anniversary. Is this your idea of justice, Ethan? Public shaming? No, I said calmly. This is private, between family and those you've hurt. We're not here to shame you, Mom. We're here to end the cycle of manipulation. By manipulating the situation, yourselves, she countered. Quite hypocritical, don't you think? Perhaps, I acknowledged, but sometimes the truth requires a dramatic setting to be heard. I reached into my briefcase one last time, removing the final folder. Which brings me to my anniversary gift. I slid the folder across to her. Congratulations. As of this morning, I own your mortgage. The room went silent. My mother stared at the document before her, uncomprehending at first, then with dawning horror as she realized the implications. That's not possible, she whispered. It's not only possible, it's done, I replied. The bank was quite happy to sell to my holding company. You're 3 months behind on payments, after all. Her face drained of color. You can't. Evict you? Foreclose? No, that's not my intention, I said. Unlike you, I don't want power over others. I want truth. Acknowledgement. Acknowledgement of what? She managed, her voice barely audible. Everything, I said simply. The lies, the manipulation, the stolen opportunities and relationships. The narrative you created where I was always falling short, always disappointing so that you could maintain control. Don't, my father interrupted, his voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. Don't lie anymore, Vivian. Not here. Not now. She looked at him, betrayal written across her face. You're taking his side? There are no sides, he replied wearily. There's just what happened and what didn't. What you did and what you didn't do. I've enabled it for too long, trying to keep the peace, trying to believe your version of events, because it was easier than confronting the truth. A single tear traced down my mother's cheek, smudging her perfect makeup. For a strange moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. The carefully constructed world she'd built was crumbling around her, and beneath the manipulation and control, there must be fear. Fear of inadequacy, fear of abandonment, fear of being seen for who she truly was. What do you want from me? She asked finally, looking directly at me. First, I want you to listen, I said. To truly hear what each person in this room has experienced because of your actions. Then, I want you to acknowledge it, not with excuses or justifications, but with genuine understanding of the harm you've caused. And the mortgage? Her voice was small. We'll discuss that after, one step at a time. For the next hour, each person spoke their truth. Diane described how my mother had spread rumors that destroyed her marriage. The Hendersons explained how she'd manipulated their daughter away from a friendship with me that threatened her control. Aunt Olivia detailed years of calculated exclusion from family events. Noah recounted watching me be systematically undermined, and how he'd feared the same treatment as he grew older. Throughout it all, my mother sat rigidly, occasionally shaking her head in denial, but mostly listening in stunned silence. The weight of so many consistent accounts seemed to finally penetrate the armor she'd built around herself. When everyone had spoken, I turned to her. "Now it's your turn." She looked around the room, then down at her perfectly manicured hands. "What am I supposed to say? That I'm a monster? That everything I thought I was doing for the good of my family was actually destructive? That my entire life has been a lie?" "No," I said quietly. "Just acknowledge what happened. See us. Really see us for once." Something shifted in her expression then, a crack in the facade that had been her protection for decades. I never thought of it as manipulation," she began haltingly. "I thought I was guiding you toward the best path, protecting you from disappointment, ensuring you had every advantage. By controlling every aspect of my life, by isolating me from people who cared about me." She flinched. "When you put it that way. Yes, I suppose that's what I did. I convinced myself it was for your own good. And the college fund? My grandfather's letters? The job opportunities?" Her eyes closed briefly, pain crossing her features. "I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of losing you," she whispered. "Of you not needing me anymore. Of you seeing that I'm not, that I've never been, as perfect or successful or confident as I pretended to be." The admission hung in the air, raw and unexpected. For the first time in my life, I glimpsed the wounded woman beneath my mother's perfect exterior, someone driven by her own insecurities, her own fears of inadequacy. "The money," my father interjected gently. "You need to tell him about the money, Vivian." She nodded, wiping her eyes carefully. "Your college fund. I did use it. Not for your grandfather's medical bills. That was a lie. I invested it in a property development that failed. I couldn't admit I'd lost it, so I created a story. And my inheritance from Grandpa? The checks he sent that I never received? Some of it went to pay debts. Some I put aside in an account I controlled. I told myself you weren't ready to manage it responsibly." She laughed bitterly. "The irony, considering the financial mess I've created." I sat back, processing her admissions. They weren't as complete as I'd hoped, still tinged with justification. But they were more honest than anything I'd heard from her before. "The mortgage," she said suddenly. "Are you going to take our house?" I removed another document from my briefcase. "That depends on you. I'm willing to restructure the loan on far more favorable terms than the bank offered. In exchange, I want 2 things." "What things?" Her voice was wary. "First, full financial transparency. Everything goes through an independent accountant. From now on, no more hidden accounts, no more spending money you don't have to maintain appearances." She nodded reluctantly. "And the second?" "Family therapy, all of us, together. We need to rebuild on a foundation of truth if we're going to have any relationship moving forward." My mother looked at my father, then at Noah, then back to me. For a moment, I thought she would refuse, would retreat back into denial and self-justification. Instead, she reached for the mortgage document with trembling fingers. "Where do I sign?" The tension in the room eased slightly. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. An acknowledgement of reality that created space for something new to grow. As we worked through the paperwork, Aunt Olivia squeezed my hand under the table. "You did good," she whispered. I wasn't sure if good was the right word for what had happened here. Necessary, perhaps. Overdue, certainly. But as I watched my mother sign her name, her usual confident flourish replaced by an uncertain scrawl, I realized that this confrontation wasn't an ending, as I'd imagined, but a beginning. The real work of healing, of building honest relationships from the ashes of manipulation and control, was only just starting. And strangely, for the first time in years, I felt something like hope when I thought about my family's future. Tenture. Months after the confrontation at Le Cirque, I stood in the driveway of my parents' home, watching moving trucks load furniture and boxes. The for sale sign had gone up 3 weeks earlier, part of the financial restructuring plan my mother had. Agreed to. Still feels surreal, Noah said, joining me with 2 cups of coffee. I never thought she'd actually go through with it. I accepted the coffee gratefully. The therapy is helping. Dr. Patterson doesn't let her hide behind excuses. The weekly family therapy sessions had been challenging but transformative. My mother had resisted initially, defaulting to tears and self-pity when confronted with difficult truths. But gradually, with Dr. Patterson's skilled guidance, she'd begun to develop genuine insight into her behavior patterns and their impact on others. She asked me about Seattle yesterday, Noah said, watching the movers carefully wrap an antique mirror. Whether I thought she'd like it there. I nearly choked on my coffee. Seattle? She's considering moving to where I live? He shrugged. The condo they're buying is only 20 minutes from your place. I think she's serious about rebuilding your relationship. The idea of my mother living nearby would have filled me with dread a year ago. Now, it was. Complicated. Not entirely. Unwelcome, but not simple either. Ethan! My father called from the garage. Could use your help with these photo albums. I found him surrounded by dusty boxes, each filled with family photographs spanning decades. Mom wants to digitize these before the move, he explained, passing me a particularly heavy album. Says it's time to stop living in the past, to make room for new memories. That's surprisingly insightful, I admitted, opening the album to find baby pictures of myself I'd never seen before. She's trying, my father said quietly. It's not perfect, but she's trying. We worked in companionable silence for a while, sorting through the physical artifacts of a family narrative that was being rewritten in real time. I owe you an apology, my father said suddenly, setting down a stack of holiday photos. I knew more than I admitted over the years. I saw what was happening, and I didn't intervene. Why not? The question had haunted me throughout our therapy sessions. He sighed deeply. Fear, mostly. Fear of confrontation, of losing her, of admitting I'd enabled something harmful. It seemed easier to go along, to smooth things over, to tell myself it wasn't that bad. But you knew about the college fund, about Grandpa's letters. Not everything, not at first. He ran a hand through his graying hair. By the time I understood the extent of it, I was complicit. And your mother is. She's always been very convincing when she feels threatened. I remembered the documents he'd left in his safe, evidence he'd collected but never used, protection against a day of reckoning he must have known would eventually come. She wouldn't have changed without the confrontation, I acknowledged. None of this would have happened if we'd just had a quiet conversation. No, he agreed. Your mother needed to face concrete consequences. The mortgage was effective. A small, sad smile crossed his face. Though I still can't believe you actually did it. To be honest, neither can I sometimes. My mother appeared in the garage doorway then, looking smaller somehow in simple jeans and a t-shirt instead of her usual carefully coordinated outfit. The movers need to know which boxes go to the storage unit and which come to the condo, she said, then noticed the albums spread around us. Oh, the baby pictures. I forgot how chubby your cheeks were, Ethan. Mom, I groaned, but without real irritation. She hesitated, then sat on an overturned crate near us. I found something you might want to see. She held out a faded envelope. It was in my jewelry box. I kept it all these years. I took the envelope, recognizing my own childish handwriting immediately. My application to the science camp, the one in 7th grade that you said got lost in the mail. She nodded, not meeting my eyes. I was afraid it would take you away from me, that you'd discover a world where you didn't need my approval. A year ago, this admission would have filled me with rage. Now, having heard her life story more, fully in therapy, her own critical mother, the early academic failures she'd hidden, the desperate need for validation that had driven her adult life, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and understanding. I missed a lot of opportunities because of your fears, I said gently but firmly. That hurt hasn't disappeared. I know, she replied, her voice thick. Dr. Patterson says I need to sit with that awareness instead of trying to justify it away, to really feel the consequences of my actions. My father reached over and touched her hand briefly, a small gesture of support that reflected their own healing journey. Their marriage had transformed over the past year, becoming more honest, more balanced, as my father found his voice and my mother learned to listen. The house near the lake, she said suddenly. The one you mentioned you were considering buying. I think you should make an offer. I stared at her, confused by the non sequitur. What? It would be a good investment, she continued. And it has that workshop space you wanted for your side projects. It took me a moment to realize what was happening. This was my mother trying, in her way, to support a decision of mine without controlling it, to give advice without manipulation. It was clumsy, imperfect, but genuine. I'm still thinking about it, I said carefully. It's a big commitment. She nodded, accepting this without pushing further. Another small victory. Well, if you decide to move forward, I know a good inspector in that area. No pressure, just available if you need it. As she left to speak with the movers, my father shook his head in wonderment. A year ago, she would have already called, the realtor on your behalf, and scheduled the inspection. Progress, I agreed. Not perfection, but progress. Later that evening, after the movers had gone and Noah had left for his apartment, I found myself alone in the backyard with my mother. We sat on the old wooden swing my father had built when I was 10, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I've been thinking about what Dr. Patterson asked in our last session, she said after a long silence, about what I hope for our relationship going forward. I waited, letting her find her words without rushing to fill the space. Another skill we'd all been practicing. I think I want to know you, she said finally. The real you, not the version of you I tried to create or control. I want to learn who my son actually is, without my expectations clouding everything. The simple honesty of this statement caught me off guard. I'd like that too, I admitted. But it won't be easy. There's a lot of history between us. I know. She pushed the swing gently with her foot. But I'm willing to do the work if you are, even when it's uncomfortable. Even when I slip back into old patterns and need to be called out. She turned to look at me directly, her eyes clearer and more present than I could ever remember them being. You were never a disappointment, Ethan. The disappointment was in me, in my inability to see and celebrate who you actually are because I was so fixated on who I thought you should be. The words washed over me like a healing balm, soothing a wound so old and deep I'd almost forgotten it was still there. It wasn't a complete healing. That would take more time, more consistent action to prove her words sincere. But it was a genuine beginning. Thank you for saying that, I said simply. Thank you for giving me the chance to say it. She hesitated, then added, and thank you for the mortgage. It was an effective wake-up call. I laughed despite myself. Not exactly a conventional, therapeutic technique, but necessary, she acknowledged. I wouldn't have changed without concrete consequences, without losing the control I thought I needed. As darkness fell around us, I realized we were having perhaps the first honest conversation of our adult lives. Not perfect, still careful. Around the most tender spots, but real in a way our interactions had never been before. The following weekend, I helped my parents move into their new condo. a modern two-bedroom that represented the beginning of their downsized, more authentic life. Gone were the pretensions of their former home, the rooms decorated for impression rather than comfort, the spaces designed to project an image rather than facilitate living. "What do you think?" my mother asked nervously as I set down the last box in their new living room. "It's smaller than what we're used to, but it's perfect," I assured her, and meant it. The large windows overlooked a small community garden. The kitchen was designed for actual cooking rather than display, and family photos, real, imperfect moments rather than staged portraits, were already being unpacked. "Your Aunt Olivia is coming for dinner next week," she added, trying to sound casual, though I could hear the anxiety beneath. "She's bringing Jackson, and Diane might stop by for dessert." These small steps toward reconciliation with those she'd hurt were among the most meaningful changes my mother had made. Each relationship was being rebuilt slowly, carefully, with genuine accountability rather than performative gestures. "That's great, Mom. I think it'll be good." She nodded, fussing with a stack of placemats. "I've been learning to cook, you." "No. Actually cook? Not just supervise caterers." She laughed self-consciously. "I'm not very good yet, but Noah's been patient." The image of my perfectionist mother fumbling through basic recipes under my brother's guidance was both amusing and touching, evidence of her willingness to be a beginner, to be imperfect in front of others. "Maybe you can teach me some basics when I visit Seattle next month," I suggested. "My repertoire is pretty much limited to scrambled eggs and microwave burritos." Her face lit up. "I'd like that." Later, as I prepared to drive back to the airport for my flight home, my mother handed me a small wrapped package. "What's this?" I asked, surprised. "Open it on the plane," she said. "It's not much, just something I should have given you a long time ago." I hugged her goodbye, our embraces still slightly awkward but increasingly genuine, and promised to call when I landed. At 30,000 feet, I unwrapped the package to find a small leather journal. Inside, in my mother's precise handwriting, was a letter. "Dear Ethan, this journal contains something I should have given you years ago. The truth. On these pages, I've written everything I can remember about the choices I made that hurt you, the opportunities I took from you, the relationships I damaged. It's not easy reading, and it wasn't easy to write, but Dr. Patterson says that real healing requires complete honesty. Beyond the admissions, you'll find something else. My commitment to you going forward. The boundaries I'll respect. The behaviors I'll continue to work on. The ways I'll support you without trying to control you. I don't expect this to fix everything. I know trust is rebuilt slowly, through consistent action rather than promises. But I want you to have this record, both of what happened and of what I'm committed to changing. You were right when you said I spent years manipulating your story. Now I'm trying to learn a new way of relating, not as a director of your life, but as a witness to it, supporting your journey without trying to determine its course, with love and genuine regret for the pain I caused. Mom P.S. There's an envelope in the back with something else that belongs to you. I turned to the final pages, finding a sealed envelope. Inside was a bank statement and a cashier's check for an amount that made my eyes widen. The full value of my college fund and grandfather's gifts with interest. The money itself was less significant than what it represented. Concrete acknowledgement, tangible accountability. My mother was not just apologizing, but attempting to make amends in the most literal sense. As the plane began its descent into Seattle, I tucked the journal into my bag, feeling a strange sense of peace. The relationship with my mother was still complex, still weighted with history, but transforming into something I'd never dared hope for. Something authentic. A month later, I stood in the kitchen of my new lake house. Yes, I'd decided to buy it after all, teaching my mother how to use the espresso machine I'd splurged on as a housewarming gift to myself. "You have to tamp the grounds firmly," I explained, demonstrating the technique. Not too hard, though, or the water can't flow through properly. As she concentrated intently, as if mastering barista skills was suddenly the most important task in the world. Like this? Perfect, I confirmed, surprised to find I genuinely enjoyed teaching her something, being the expert while she was the novice. This role reversal would have been unimaginable a year ago. My father and Noah were out on the deck, assembling the grill we'd bought for weekend cookouts. Through the window, I could see them laughing together, more relaxed than I could remember seeing them in years. "I like this place," my mother said, looking around the kitchen with its view of the lake. "It suits you." "Thanks," I replied, realizing I didn't feel the need to justify my choice or defend it against critique, because none was coming. "I think so too." As we carried the finished coffees out to join my father and brother, I reflected on how much had changed since that graduation day when my mother had called me a disappointment. The words that had once cut so deeply had lost their power, replaced by new experiences, new patterns, new truths. The mortgage deed that had seemed like an act of revenge had transformed into something else entirely. A catalyst for healing, a turning point from which an authentic family had begun to emerge from the ruins of a perfect facade. "Ethan," my father called, "come settle a debate about these burgers." I stepped onto the deck, into the sunshine and the imperfect, honest presence of my family, recognizing that while the past couldn't be undone, the future remained unwritten, and, for the first time in memory, I was genuinely looking forward to the story we might create together. 2 years had passed since I bought my mother's mortgage and everything changed. The lake house had become a gathering place for our healing family, with weekend visits that grew increasingly comfortable as old wounds slowly knit themselves into scars, still visible, but no longer raw to the touch. I sat on the dock one autumn evening, feet dangling in the cool water, watching the sunset paint the clouds in brilliant oranges and pinks. The sound of laughter drifted from the house behind me, where my mother was attempting to teach Noah how to make grandmother's apple, a recipe she'd never bothered sharing before our reconciliation. "Room for one more?" Aunt Olivia's voice came from behind me. I patted the wooden planks beside me. "Always." She settled next to me, handing over a steaming mug of coffee. "Your mother added cinnamon. Says it's your favorite now." The small observation touched me, evidence of my mother's new habit of actually paying attention to my preferences rather than projecting her own onto me. "She's trying," I acknowledged, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "More than trying," Olivia corrected gently. "She's changing. We all are." It was true. The transformation that had begun with confrontation had deepened over time, not always in straight lines, but with genuine progress. Family therapy had continued, though less frequently now, giving us tools to communicate honestly without falling into old patterns. "I got a job offer yesterday," I said, watching a pair of ducks glide across the darkening lake. "Executive position at Horizon Technologies." "That's wonderful," Olivia squeezed my shoulder. "Have you told your parents yet?" I shook my head, still processing it myself. It would mean relocating to Boston. "Ah." She nodded in understanding. "And you're worried about how your mother will react." "Old habits," I admitted with a rueful smile. Part of me still expects manipulation, guilt trips, subtle sabotage. But you know better now. "Intellectually, yes. Emotionally." I shrugged. "It's complicated." "Growth always is," she said, nudging my shoulder with hers. "But I think you should tell her. Give her the chance to surprise you." Inside, the kitchen had become a battlefield of flour and apple peels, with Noah dramatically lamenting his inability to crimp a pie crust, while my mother actually laughed, at the mess they'd created together. "What happened here?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Culinary disaster," Noah declared, holding up hands covered in dough. but Mom says it'll taste good even if it looks like modern art. The ugliest pies taste the best, my mother said with conviction, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear and leaving a streak of flour across her cheek. That's what my mother always told me. It was a small thing, this sharing of a memory of her own mother, this acceptance of imperfection, but it represented miles of emotional progress. I have some news, I said before I could overthink it. I've been offered a position at Horizon Technologies in Boston. The kitchen went quiet. Noah looked between our mother and me, clearly anticipating the tension of earlier years. But my mother simply wiped her hands on a dish towel, her expression thoughtful. Horizon. They're doing innovative work in clean energy development, aren't they? I nodded, surprised. You've heard of them? I've been following your industry more closely, she admitted. Trying to understand your world better. She hesitated. When would you need to decide? I have 2 weeks, I said, still waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the subtle pressure that had once been her specialty. Instead, she asked, "What do you think about it? Is it what you want?" The simple question, centered on my desires rather than her preferences, nearly undid me. I think so, I said honestly. The work is fascinating, the team is brilliant, and the compensation is significant. Then I'm happy for you, she said, and the most remarkable thing was that she seemed to mean it. Though I'll miss our weekend coffees. Boston's not that far, I found myself saying. Maybe you could visit sometimes. Her eyes brightened. I'd like that, if you wanted. I'd want that, I confirmed, the words feeling both strange and right. Later, after pie had been consumed, delicious despite its appearance, and my father had fallen asleep in front of the fireplace, I found myself alone with my mother in the kitchen, washing dishes together in companionable silence. Can I ask you something? She said suddenly, passing me a wet plate to dry. Of course. Are you happy, Ethan? Not just professionally, but in your life? The question caught me off guard, intimate in a way our conversations rarely ventured, even with our progress. Mostly, I answered truthfully. I love my work, my home. I have good friends. I thought of Zoe, now engaged and living just down the road, and Noah, finding his own path with newfound confidence. There are still things I'm figuring out. Like what? She asked, and amazingly, it didn't feel intrusive but genuinely curious. I considered how much to share, then decided on honesty. Relationships, for one. I haven't had much success there. She nodded, scrubbing a stubborn bit of pie filling from a fork. That's partly my fault, I think. What do you mean? She sighed, organizing her thoughts before speaking. Another new habit from therapy. The way I treated you. The conditional approval. The control. It affects how you connect with others. Dr. Patterson helped me understand that. When you grow up believing love is performance-based, it's hard to trust that anyone could love you simply for who you are. The insight was so accurate it made my chest ache. I'm working on it, I said softly. For what it's worth, she continued. Whoever is lucky enough to be loved by you will be getting someone extraordinary. Not because of your achievements or your career or any external measure of success, but because of who you are, your integrity, your compassion, your resilience. Tears pricked at my eyes, and I busied myself with drawing a glass to hide them. This recognition of my intrinsic worth rather than my accomplishments was perhaps the greatest gift my mother had given me since our reconciliation began. Thank you, I managed finally. That means a lot. She finished the last dish and dried her hands, looking out the window at the darkness that had settled over the lake. I've been writing, she said unexpectedly. Writing? A memoir of sorts, about the patterns I inherited from my own mother, how I perpetuated them with you, and the work of breaking that cycle. She smiled self-consciously. My therapist suggested it initially, but I've found it clarifying. I'd like to read it sometime, I said, surprising myself with the realization that it was true. If you wanted to share it. I'd like that. Too, she replied. It's still rough, but maybe when I've finished a draft. We stood there in the quiet kitchen, mother and son, the distance between us not gone but bridged in ways I wouldn't have thought possible 2 years earlier. Take the job in Boston if it's what you want, she said finally. Don't factor my feelings into your decision. I've taken up enough space in your choices already. I nodded, recognizing the gift she was offering. Freedom without guilt. Independence. Without rejection. I haven't decided yet, I said honestly. But when I do, it will be for the right reasons. The weekend visit ended the following afternoon, with hugs that felt increasingly natural and promises to call that would actually be kept. As I watched my parents' car disappear down the winding driveway, I felt a gentle hand on my shoulder. You look pensive, Zoe observed, having stopped by to pick up a kayak she'd left at my dock. Good visit or complicated visit? Both, I admitted, but more good than complicated these days. We settled on the porch swing, falling into the easy rhythm of a friendship that had weathered every storm of my adult life. So, Boston, she said, raising an eyebrow. That's a big move. If I take it? I stretched my legs out in front of me. I'm still weighing my options. And how did the formidable Vivian Carter take the news? Zoe asked, only half joking. She'd witnessed firsthand the damage my mother's manipulation had caused over the years. She was supportive, actually, genuinely interested in what I wanted. Zoe's eyebrows shot up. Wow, the therapy is really working, huh? Apparently. I couldn't help smiling. She's not a different person. She still has her moments of trying to manage everything, still struggles with letting go of control. But she's self-aware now. She catches herself, apologizes when she oversteps. That's huge, Ethan. Zoe squeezed my hand. I know how much you needed that from her. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the afternoon light play across the lake's surface. Finally, Zoe spoke again, her voice careful. Can I ask you something kind of personal? Since when do you need permission? I teased. She smiled but pressed on seriously. Now that things are better with your family, with your mom specifically, are you happier? Has it healed the things it was supposed to heal? The question made me pause, considering my answer carefully. It's helped, I said finally. More than I expected, honestly. But it hasn't magically fixed everything. The damage of those years didn't disappear just because we've reconciled. What's still hard? She asked gently. Trust, mainly, I admitted. Not just with her, but in all. My relationships. I still catch myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for conditional love to show its conditions. Zoe nodded, understanding. The hypervigilance, always scanning for signs of disapproval or manipulation. Exactly. I sighed. And there's this emptiness sometimes. Like I spent so many years trying to earn love that I never learned how to simply receive it or give it freely. That's why you work 80 hours a week and volunteer on weekends, she observed. Still trying. To prove your worth. Ouch, I laughed, but without real offense. Direct hit. Just calling it like I see it. She nudged my shoulder affectionately. For what it's worth, you deserve love just for being you. No performance required. So my therapist keeps telling me, I said wryly. Smart therapist. Zoe checked her watch and stood reluctantly. I should get going. Marcus is making his famous lasagna tonight. I walked her to her car, helping to secure the kayak to the roof rack. Before getting in, she turned and hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you," she said fiercely. "Not for the fancy job offers or the lake house or any of that. I'm proud of how brave you've been in facing all this family stuff head on. That takes real courage." Her words stayed with me long after she'd gone, echoing as I moved through my evening routine. Pride without performance, love without conditions. The very things I'd sought from my mother for decades were freely offered by this friend who had seen me at my worst and valued me anyway. The following week, as I deliberated over the Boston offer, I found myself driving past my parents' condo, on my way back from a meeting in the city. On impulse, I stopped, knowing my father would be at his weekly golf game, but my mother would likely be home. She answered the door with reading glasses perched on her nose and a pencil tucked behind her ear. "Ethan! This is a surprise!" "I was in the neighborhood," I explained, following her inside. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Just working on my writing," she said, clearing papers from the dining table where she'd been working. "Can I get you something? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine, thanks." I noticed how different the condo felt from their old house. Warm, lived in, personal rather than performative. "How's the memoir coming?" "Slowly," she admitted. "It's harder than I expected. To be honest about certain periods of my life. To see them clearly, without defensiveness." "I can imagine," I said, though in truth, her willingness to examine her own behavior still surprised me. The mother I'd grown up with had been allergic to self-reflection. She studied me for a moment. Her head tilted slightly. "You didn't just happen to be passing by, did you?" I smiled, caught. "Not entirely, no." "The Boston position," she guessed. "You're still deciding." "I am." I sat at the table, tracing the wood grain with my finger. "It's a great opportunity, but I've built a life here now. The lake house, friends, a community. Even family," I added meaningfully. She nodded, understanding the weight of that last word. "And you're worried that leaving might undo some of the progress we've made." "Maybe," I admitted. "Or that distance might make it easier to slip back into old patterns." "That's a fair concern," she acknowledged, then surprised me by reaching across the table to cover my hand with hers. "But I think we've built something sturdier than that now." "I hope so." "I know so," she said with unusual certainty. "Because I'm not the same person who needed to control your every move. And you're not the same person who needed my approval to feel worthy." The simple truth of her words struck me deeply. We had both changed, grown, evolved through the painful process of confrontation and reconciliation. "I have something for you," she said suddenly, rising and going to a drawer in the living room. She returned with a small wrapped package. "I was going to give it to you next weekend, but now seems right." I unwrapped it carefully to find a small wooden box, hand-carved with intricate patterns. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was an old-fashioned key. "It's the key to the lake house," I said, confused. "But I already have one." "Not your lake house," she clarified. "The original one. Your grandfather's property on Lake Champlain." I stared at her, uncomprehending. "But that was sold years ago after he died." She shook her head. "That's what I told you, what your father and I agreed to tell you. In truth, your grandfather left it directly to you in his will, with the stipulation that you receive it on your 30th birthday." "Which was last month," I said slowly, pieces clicking into place. She nodded, guilt and regret passing across her features. I was angry when I learned of his decision. I'd always assumed the property would come to me, then to you through my inheritance. When he bypassed me entirely. She sighed. It felt like another criticism of my parenting, another way he was undermining my relationship with you. "So, you hid it from me." It wasn't a question. "Yes," she admitted simply. The deed has been held in trust all these years. I received notification last month that it was time for the transfer, and I considered continuing the deception. What changed your mind? You did, she said softly. All of this, the confrontation, the therapy, the hard work of rebuilding trust. I couldn't betray that. Not again. I turned the key over in my hand, feeling its weight, both physical and symbolic. Thank you for telling me the truth. It's long overdue, she acknowledged. The property has been maintained by the trust, but it will need some attention. Your grandfather always said it was his favorite place in the world. Peaceful, removed from pretense. He wanted you to have that. The gift was enormous. Not just the valuable property, but the honesty it represented. The tangible evidence of my mother's commitment to change. I don't know what to say, I admitted. You don't need to say anything, she assured me. But there's one more thing you should know. The property is about 40 minutes outside of Boston. The implication hit me immediately. So if I took the job, you'd have a place already waiting for you, she finished. A connection to your grandfather, a retreat from the city. And you're okay with that? I pressed, still seeking reassurance that my independence wouldn't damage our healing relationship. More than okay, she said firmly. I want you to build the life that fulfills you, Ethan. Not the one I imagined for you, not the one that keeps you close out of obligation, but the one that makes you genuinely happy. It was perhaps the most maternal thing she had ever said to me. This blessing of my autonomy, this prioritization of my happiness above her preferences. I haven't decided yet, I said again, though the scales were certainly tipping toward Boston with this new information. But knowing about the lake house, having your support, it helps. Whatever you decide, she said, I'll be here, or there, visiting as invited, or on the phone. Whatever form our relationship takes, I'm committed to it now. The real version, not the perfect facade. On my drive home, the key sat on the passenger seat beside me, catching the late afternoon sunlight. It represented so much more than access to a property. It was a door to my heritage, to a grandfather who had loved me enough to ensure I had a place of my own, to a future that could incorporate both my independence and my family ties. 2 weeks later, I accepted the position at Horizon Technologies. The decision, when it finally came, felt right. A step forward rather than away, an embrace of opportunity rather than an escape from dysfunction. My parents helped me pack up the lake house. My mother surprisingly practical about the logistics and genuinely excited about exploring Boston during future visits. As we loaded the last boxes into the moving truck, she handed me an envelope. One last thing, she said. A housewarming gift for the new place. Inside was a framed photograph I'd never seen before. My grandfather and me on the dock of the Lake Champlain property, fishing poles in hand, both of us laughing at something long forgotten. I must have been about 7 years old. Where did you find this? I asked, throat tight with emotion. In one of his albums, she admitted. I kept it hidden all these years because it hurt to see how close you two were. How easily he connected with you when I found it so difficult. The admission reflected how far she'd come, acknowledging her jealousy, her insecurity, the root causes of behavior that had once seemed simply controlling or cruel. Thank you, I said, carefully placing the frame in the car rather than the moving truck. It means a lot. She nodded, wiping away a tear. He would be proud of you, you know, of the man you've become despite the obstacles I put in your way. I think, I said carefully, he would be proud of both of us now, of how we found our way to something honest. The morning I left for Boston dawned clear and cool, the kind of perfect fall day that showcases the Northeast at its best. My parents and Noah stood in the driveway of the lake house, coffee mugs in hand, as I made my final preparations to leave. "Call when you get there," my mother said, then caught herself. "If you want to, I mean. No pressure." I smiled at her self-correction. "I will." "The tech community in Boston is excellent," my father added. "Lots of innovation, good networking, opportunities." "And the food scene is amazing," Noah contributed. "You have to try that ramen place I told you about." Their support, enthusiastic but not smothering, interested but not intrusive, wrapped around me like a comfortable blanket as I closed the trunk and turned to say goodbye. "I was thinking," my mother said hesitantly, "maybe for Thanksgiving, if you're not coming back here, we could come to you, see the new place, help you get settled." "I'd like that," I said, meaning it. Hugs were exchanged, promises to stay, in touch that would actually be kept, and then I was in my car, pulling away from one chapter of my life toward another. As I reached the end of the driveway, I glanced in my rearview mirror. My family still stood there, waving. Not perfect, not completely healed, but real in a way they had never been before. My mother's arm was around Noah's waist, my father's, hand on her shoulder, a genuine family tableau rather than a posed performance. The mortgage that had seemed like an act of defiance had transformed into something I could never have anticipated, a catalyst for authentic connection, an opportunity for genuine change, a beginning rather than an ending. I turned onto the main road, heading east toward Boston, toward my grandfather's lake house, toward a future built on truth rather than manipulation. The key sat on the dashboard, catching the morning light, a reminder that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead exactly where we need to go. The first winter at my grandfather's Lake Champlain property arrived with a fierceness that reminded me why he had always called it a three-season home. Snow piled against the windows, the old heating system groaned with effort, and the wind, off the frozen lake, cut through even the thickest sweaters. But there was a beauty to it that I hadn't anticipated. The pristine white landscape, the absolute stillness on windless mornings, the way the house creaked and settled like a living thing around me. I had been in Boston for 4 months, finding my rhythm at Horizon Technologies while spending weekends at the lake house, slowly restoring it to its former charm. Each room revealed new connections to my grandfather, his initials carved subtly into the mantelpiece, fishing lures still organized in tackle boxes in the shed, books with his notes in the margins lining built-in shelves. "You've been holding out on me," Zoe declared, arriving for her promised visit the weekend before Christmas, stomping snow from her boots on the porch. "This place is straight out of a holiday movie." I laughed, helping her with her bags. "Wait until you see it, when the pipes freeze and I have to melt snow for coffee." "Still," she insisted, turning slowly in the great room with its soaring ceilings and wall of windows facing the lake. "It's magical, Ethan. I can see why your grandfather wanted you to have it." That evening, as we sat before a crackling fire, with mugs of mulled wine, Zoe studied me with the frank assessment that had characterized our friendship since college. "You seem different," she observed. "More settled, somehow." I considered this. "I think I am. The job is challenging in the right ways, and this place," I gestured around us. "Being here feels like connecting with something authentic, like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." "It suits you," she agreed. "And how are things with Vivian the Reformed?" I smiled at her nickname for my mother. "Evolving. She calls every Sunday, not to check up on me, just to talk. And she asks questions about my work that show she's actually paying attention to what matters to me." "Miraculous," Zoe murmured, only half joking. "It's not perfect," I acknowledged. "She still has moments where her instinct to control surfaces, but she catches herself now or accepts it when I point it out. It's nice." "And you're okay with all of it? The reconciliation, the move, the new job?" I took a sip of wine, considering her question carefully. "I think okay isn't quite right." I'm healing, maybe? Learning who I am when I'm not defined by either rebellion against or submission to my mother's expectations. Zoe smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. That's the best kind of freedom. What about you? I asked, noticing the way her engagement ring caught the firelight. Wedding plans coming along? Actually, she hesitated. That's partly why I wanted to visit. Marcus and I were hoping you'd be my man of honor. To hell with tradition. There's no one else I'd want standing beside me. I'd be honored, I said sincerely, touched by the request. Though I draw the line at wearing whatever bridesmaid dress you've picked out. She laughed, relaxing into the couch. Deal. The wedding's in June, by the way. Here in New England, actually. Cape Cod. Marcus's family has a place there. June's perfect, I said. And speaking of family visits, mine arrive tomorrow for an early Christmas celebration. Are you sure you don't want to escape before they get here? Zoe shook her head firmly. I wouldn't miss Vivian Carter in full holiday mode for anything. Besides, I want to see this transformation for myself. The next day, as my parents' rental car crunched up the snowy driveway, I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. The old anxiety that always preceded family gatherings. But alongside it was something newer, genuine anticipation. My father emerged first, whistling appreciatively at the snow-covered landscape. This is exactly as I remember it, he called, helping my mother navigate the slippery path to the porch. Gordon used to bring me fishing here when we were first married. My mother approached more cautiously, bundled against the cold, her gaze taking in the renovations I'd made to the exterior, fresh paint, repaired shutters, new lighting. Ethan, she breathed, reaching the porch. It's wonderful. The sincerity in her voice eased something in me I hadn't realized was tense. Thanks. Still a work in progress, but it's getting there. Zoe appeared behind me with a tray of steaming mugs. Hot chocolate for the weary travelers. Introductions were made. My parents had met Zoe briefly at graduation but hardly remembered her. And we settled in the great room, where I'd built a fire in anticipation of their arrival. The drive from Boston wasn't too bad? I asked, helping my father with their luggage. Not at all, he replied. Though your mother insisted on leaving at dawn to beat the weather. Weather report was clear all day. I braced instinctively for my mother's defensive response, the familiar pattern of my parents' passive-aggressive exchanges. Instead, she laughed softly. Old habits, she admitted, surprising me. I've always been a bit of a control freak about travel. But the drive was beautiful once I relaxed enough to enjoy it. The self-awareness in her comment, the ability to acknowledge her controlling tendencies without defensiveness, was still new enough to startle me. Well, you're here now, I said, and dinner's almost ready. As we moved to the kitchen, my mother paused before a wall of photographs I'd found in the attic and carefully restored. My grandfather with his fishing buddies, my grandmother in her garden, and several of me as a child during summer visits I barely remembered. I'd forgotten how much time you spent here as a little boy, she said quietly. Before things changed. The acknowledgement of her role in severing that connection hung between us. Neither accusation nor excuse, simply truth. I'm rediscovering it now, I replied, choosing to focus on the present rather than the painful past. Come see what I've done with the kitchen. The evening unfolded with surprising ease. My mother had brought homemade cookies, actually made by her, she insisted, not store-bought and repackaged as had been her habit when I was growing up. My father shared stories about his visits to the lake house as a young man, filling in gaps in my understanding of my grandfather. Zoe, ever perceptive, facilitated conversation when it lagged, asked questions that allowed each of us to share without pressure, and subtly steered away from potentially triggering topics. By the time we finished the wine and apple crisp that served as dessert, The atmosphere was relaxed in a way family gatherings had never been in my memory. "I have something for you," my mother said as we cleared the dishes. "An early Christmas gift of sorts." She retrieved a thick envelope from her bag and handed it to me with uncharacteristic nervousness. "It's not wrapped, I'm afraid." It didn't seem right somehow. Inside was a stack of photographs, all of me at various ages, from infancy through college. But these weren't the formal portraits that had lined the walls of our family home. These were candid moments. Me asleep on my father's chest as an infant, building a lopsided sandcastle at the beach, proudly displaying a science fair project, laughing with friends at high school graduation. "I don't remember most of these," I said, flipping through them with growing wonder. "No, you wouldn't," she agreed softly. "They weren't the perfect images I wanted to display. Your hair was messy, or your shirt was untucked, or you were making a silly face. So I hid them away." The admission hung in the air, a perfect encapsulation of how she had treated not just photographs, but me, hiding away the authentic in favor of the curated and controlled. "But they're the real you," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "The joyful, curious, sometimes messy child you actually were, not the perfect image I tried to project. I thought you might want them for your walls here. A more honest visual history." The gift was more meaningful than any expensive item she could have purchased. Tangible evidence of her commitment to truth over facade, to seeing me as I was rather than as she had wished me to be. "Thank you," I said simply, the words inadequate but heartfelt. "This means a lot." Later, after my parents had retired to the guest room and Zoe to the loft space, I sat alone by the dying fire, examining the photographs more closely. Each one was a window into a moment I'd lived but not necessarily remembered. Authentic experiences that had been filtered out of our family narrative because they didn't fit my mother's preferred image. One in particular caught my attention. 10-year-old me with my grandfather on the very dock visible from the window, both of us covered in mud after what appeared to be an epic fishing expedition gone awry. We were laughing, utterly unself-conscious, connected in genuine joy. I realized with sudden clarity that what I was seeking, had always been seeking, wasn't perfection but authenticity. Not achievement but connection. The freedom to be messy, imperfect, and still worthy of love. The next morning, I woke early to find my mother already in the kitchen, coffee brewed, gazing out at the snow-covered lake. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, pouring myself a cup. She shook her head. "Just enjoying the quiet. It's beautiful here, Ethan. Peaceful in a way I'd forgotten places could be." We stood side by side at the window, watching the sunrise illuminate the frozen landscape. "I've been thinking about those photographs," she said finally. "About why I kept them hidden for so long." I waited, giving her space to continue at her own pace, another skill we'd all been practicing. "I was so fixated on how things appeared," she said softly. "The perfect family, the successful children, the enviable life. I missed so much reality in pursuit of that image." "We all did," I acknowledged, neither accusation nor absolution, simply truth. "But you're finding it now," she observed, gesturing to the house around us, to the lake beyond. "This place, your work in Boston, the people you're surrounding yourself with, it's real in a way our life in Lakeside. Heights never was." The insight surprised me, not just that she recognized this truth, but that she could articulate it without defensiveness or attempts to justify the past. "I'm trying," I admitted. "Some days are easier than others." "That's the definition of real life," she said with a small smile. "Uneven, unpredictable, sometimes messy. Like those photographs you brought." "Exactly." She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "I have a confession to make." I tensed slightly, old reflexes still quick to anticipate manipulation or control. beneath any overture from my mother. "This isn't easy for me to admit," she continued, "but I've been envious of you, Ethan. Not just your success, though that too, but your authenticity. Your willingness to walk away from lakeside heights, from the path I tried to set for you, from the facade." "It wasn't easy," I reminded her gently. "No, I imagine not." She set down her mug and turned to face me fully. "But it was brave. And watching you build this life, this honest, imperfect, meaningful life, has helped me see what I sacrificed in pursuit of appearances. What we all sacrificed." The admission was perhaps the most genuine conversation we'd ever had. No manipulation, no ulterior motive, just raw truth between a mother and son who were finally learning to see each other clearly. "It's not too late, you know," I found myself saying, "for you to find some authenticity too." She smiled, a flash of vulnerability crossing her features. "I'm trying. My therapist says I'm making progress. Your father thinks so too, though he's still cautious. 28 years of marriage based on image maintenance isn't easy to rebuild. But worth trying." "Absolutely worth trying," she affirmed. "Just as this, our relationship, has been worth all the uncomfortable therapy sessions and difficult conversations." Before I could respond, Zoe appeared in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep. "Sorry to interrupt the early bird convention. Is that coffee I smell?" The moment shifted, the intimate conversation giving way to the practical matters of breakfast preparation and plans for the day. But something had changed, some deeper understanding established between my mother and me that felt like solid ground beneath my feet. The visit continued for 3 more days, each one easier than the last. We explored the small town nearby, decorated a slightly lopsided Christmas tree cut from my own property, and even ventured onto the frozen lake for what my father insisted on calling extreme ice fishing, but was really just regular fishing in very cold conditions. On their final evening, as we sat around the fire playing an increasingly competitive game of Scrabble, my phone rang, the Boston office calling despite the late hour. "Sorry," I apologized, stepping away to take the call. "Work emergency." When I returned 10 minutes later, my mother looked up with concern. "Everything okay?" "Just a glitch in the system," I explained. "Nothing serious, but I need to go into the office tomorrow morning to help sort it out." "But we're not leaving until afternoon," my father frowned. "We were planning that hike you mentioned." "I know, I'm sorry," I said, genuinely disappointed. "Rain check for your next visit?" To my surprise, it was my mother who adjusted most easily to the change in plans. "Of course you need to handle your work responsibilities," she said simply. "That's more important than a hike we can take any time." There was no guilt trip, no passive-aggressive sigh, no subtle implication that I was choosing work over family, just straightforward acceptance of a reality that didn't match her preferences, perhaps the clearest evidence yet of her transformation. The next morning, as I prepared to leave for Boston, she handed me a small package. "A little something for your desk at work. No need to open it now." I tucked it into my bag with a promise to call once they were on the road home, and headed into the city. The emergency turned out to be manageable, if tedious, and by mid-afternoon I was at my desk finalizing the fix when I remembered my mother's gift. The package contained a small framed photograph I recognized from her collection. Me, at about 8 years old, proudly displaying a science project with wild hair and mismatched clothes, utterly joyful in my achievement. With it was a note in her precise handwriting. "To remind you that your worth has never been in your perfection, but in your passion. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. Love, Mom." I placed the frame on my desk. This authentic slice of childhood, a stark contrast to the polished professionalism of my office, but somehow perfectly right. That evening, as I drove back to the lake house in darkness, snow beginning to fall again, I reflected on how much had changed since that confrontation over my parents' mortgage. The initial goal had been simple, even vengeful, to expose my mother's manipulation, to force acknowledgement of the harm she had caused. What I hadn't anticipated was the healing that would follow, not instantaneous or complete, but incremental, genuine, and ongoing. The mortgage deed that had seemed like a weapon had become instead a bridge, a moment of truth that allowed something authentic to finally grow in soil, too long poisoned by facades and control. As I turned onto the private road leading to the lake house, headlights illuminating swirling snowflakes, my phone rang through the car's speakers. "Just checking that you made it back safely," my mother's voice came through, concern but not control in her tone. "Almost home," I assured her. "You and Dad get back okay?" "Perfect timing. We beat the snow. Your father's already planning our spring visit if that's all right with you. He's got some idea about fishing when the ice melts." "I'd like that," I said, and meant it. As I pulled up to the dark house, lights automatically sensing my arrival and illuminating the porch, I felt a sense of peace that had once seemed impossible. The journey from that graduation day insult to this moment had been neither straight nor easy, but it had led somewhere vital, to truth, to boundaries, to the possibility of love without conditions. Inside, I built a fire against the growing cold, the photograph from my mother's gift still vivid in my mind. That joyful child, with uncombed hair and unrestrained enthusiasm, the authentic self I had been before learning to perform for approval. That child wasn't gone, I realized, just buried beneath layers of protective adaptation. And perhaps, in this house that connected me to my past while supporting my future, I could finally reclaim that unfiltered joy. The following weekend, as January settled heavily over New England, I invited Noah to the lake house, eager to share this piece of our grandfather's legacy with him. He arrived with his girlfriend Mia, whom I'd met only briefly during holiday video calls. "This place is incredible," Mia breathed, turning slowly in the great room. "And you've done all this renovation yourself?" "Most of it," I confirmed. "Though I hired professionals for the electrical work and some of the plumbing, I'm handy, not suicidal." Noah laughed, setting down their bags. "Remember when you tried to fix Mom's garbage disposal and flooded the entire kitchen?" "A formative experience," I deadpanned, "taught me my limitations." We settled into a comfortable evening of takeout from the local Thai restaurant and catching up on Noah's latest projects. As my younger brother, he had experienced a different version of our mother than I had. Her control somewhat tempered by my earlier rebellion, but still present in more subtle forms. "She's different now," he observed, as if reading my thoughts. "More present when we talk, less focused on appearances." "The therapy is helping," I agreed. And I think finally facing the truth about her behavior was necessary, however painful it was at the time. Mia, who had heard the story of the mortgage confrontation but hadn't been present for any of it, looked between us curiously. "It's remarkable that you've been able to rebuild a relationship after everything. Many families never recover from that kind of revelation." "It's still a work in progress," I acknowledged. "We have moments where old patterns resurface. But there's a foundation of honesty now that makes those moments manageable rather than devastating." Later, after Mia had gone to bed, Noah and I sat on the porch despite the cold, bundled in blankets, watching the moonlight on the frozen lake. "Do you ever think about having kids?" he asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Though the idea is complicated." "Because of Mom," he guessed. "Fear of repeating patterns." "Partly," I agreed. "Though therapy has helped with that too. I'm more aware now of the inheritance we carry. Not just houses and money, but patterns of behavior, ways of giving and withholding love." Noah nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Mia and I are talking about getting engaged." "That's great," I said, genuinely happy for him. "She seems wonderful." "She is. he agreed with a soft smile. And she knows all about our family history, the good, the bad, and the catastrophically dysfunctional. But we've been having these conversations about what kind of parents we want to be someday, and I keep coming back to what we learned from Mom. Not as a model to follow, but as an awareness of how conditional love damages children. You'll be a great father, I said with certainty. Precisely because you're conscious of those patterns. So would you, he replied, if that's what you want. I considered this, looking out at the vastness of the frozen lake, the stars sharp and clear in the winter sky. Maybe someday, with the right person. Anyone on the horizon? He asked, nudging my shoulder. Boston's a big city, lots of potential. I laughed, deflecting with practiced ease. The lake house renovation is enough of a relationship for now. Very demanding, constantly needs attention, keeps me up at night. Noah saw through the deflection but didn't push, another skill he'd developed through our family's healing process, respecting boundaries, allowing people their privacy, not pressing for performances of emotion or disclosure. The weekend passed quickly. Ice fishing attempts that yielded nothing but laughter, a hike through snow-covered woods to a lookout point over the frozen lake, evenings of board games and easy conversation. On their final morning, as I helped load their car, Noah paused before getting in. You seem happy here, he observed. Settled in a way I don't think I've ever seen before. I am, I realized, somewhat surprised by the truth of it. Not perfectly happy. There are still things I'm working through, aspects of life that feel unresolved, but fundamentally content in a way that's new. Because of the house? The job? I considered this carefully. Those are part of it, but I think it's more about finally feeling authentic, like I'm building a life based on who I actually am, not who anyone else thinks I should be. Noah nodded in understanding. Freedom from the performance. Exactly. As their car disappeared down the driveway, I stood in the cold morning air, reflecting on our conversation. Happiness had always seemed like a distant concept, something to be achieved through perfect performance, through meeting expectations, through carefully controlled appearances. The contentment I felt now was different, imperfect, sometimes messy, but genuinely mine. Back inside, I noticed Noah had left something on the kitchen counter, a small wooden box I recognized from our grandfather's study. Inside was a folded piece of paper. I unfolded the paper with careful fingers, recognizing my grandfather's distinctive handwriting immediately. It was dated just weeks before his death, addressed simply to Ethan. My boy, if you're reading this, then you found your way to the lake house at last. I've arranged for it to come to you when you're ready, old enough to appreciate it, but young enough to make it truly yours. This place has always been a refuge for me, somewhere the pretenses of everyday life fall away. Your grandmother and I were never more ourselves than when we were here. I hope it becomes that for you too. A place of authenticity in a world that, too often, rewards performance over truth. I've watched from a distance as your mother shaped you according to her vision rather than nurturing who you truly are. It's been my greatest regret that I couldn't protect you from that influence. Perhaps I should have tried harder, been more direct. But family dynamics are complex, and my relationship with your mother has always been strained by her need for perfection and my inability to provide it. Know this, Ethan. You have always been enough exactly as you are. Your worth isn't measured in achievements or appearances, but in your capacity for genuine connection, for truth, for joy. I see those qualities in you, even when circumstances have required you to hide them. There's a loose floorboard in the main bedroom, under the east window. Beneath it, you'll find a journal I've kept since you were born. It's yours now, not because I expect you to preserve some idealized version of our family, but because I want you to know that someone was witnessing the real you all along, valuing you not for what you accomplished, but simply for being. With love and faith in who you are, Grandpa Gordon. I sat with the letter for a long time, tears blurring my vision, feeling both the grief of having missed years with this man who had seen me so clearly and the profound gift of his recognition across time. Eventually, I made my way to the main bedroom and located the loose floorboard he'd described. The journal was bound in worn leather, its pages filled with my grandfather's observations, anecdotes, and reflections spanning my entire life. Though we'd had limited direct contact after my mother's interference began, he had followed my journey from afar, noting academic achievements but focusing more on glimpses of my character, my interests, my struggles. He'd included newspaper clippings of school events, secondhand stories from family friends who'd encountered me, and his own reflections on the person I was becoming despite the pressure to be someone else. The final entry was dated just days before his death. Ethan graduated college today. Couldn't attend, Vivian made that clear, but saw photos through James Wilson, whose daughter was also graduating. Ethan gave the honors address, apparently, spoke about innovation as an act of authentic creation rather than mere achievement. Sounds like he's finding his voice despite everything. I leave this house to him with hope that someday he'll break free completely, build a life that reflects his true self rather than others' expectations. The lake has always had that effect on those who are ready to listen to it. I closed the journal, overwhelmed by the connection to a grandfather I'd barely known, but who had known me, had seen past the facade to the authentic person beneath, had valued that person enough to preserve these observations, to give me this refuge. That night, I slept in my grandfather's room for the first time since moving in, the journal on the nightstand beside me, feeling his presence in the creaks of the old house, in the wind off the lake, in the inherited dent on his side of the mattress. And for perhaps the first time, I slept without the weight of performance anxiety, of measuring up, of being enough. Spring arrived slowly to Lake Champlain, ice reluctantly giving way to open water, bare branches gradually yielding, tender green buds. I settled into a rhythm between Boston and the lake house, finding balance between career ambition and personal peace in a way that would have seemed impossible before. My mother called regularly, our conversations evolving from careful politeness to genuine interest in each other's lives. She shared updates on her therapy progress, her new hobby of pottery. Imperfection is the whole point, apparently, very challenging for me. And her cautious reconnection with old friends she'd alienated during her years of image maintenance. I saw Diane Miller for lunch yesterday, she mentioned during one Sunday call. First time in nearly 20 years without an agenda or performance. How was it? I asked, genuinely curious. Uncomfortable, she admitted with a laugh. But good uncomfortable, if that makes sense. Like stretching muscles that have atrophied. She asked about you, by the way. What did you tell her? There was a brief pause, and I could almost see her considering her words carefully. I told her the truth, that you're building a remarkable life on your own terms, and that I'm learning to appreciate the person you actually are rather than who I tried to make you be. The simple honesty of her response caught me off guard. No exaggeration of my achievements, no curated version of our relationship, just straightforward truth. Thank you, I said quietly. That means a lot. It's just the truth, Ethan, she replied, her voice gentler than I could ever remember it being. I'm done with facades. By early summer, the lake house transformation was nearly complete. I'd preserved its essential character while updating systems and spaces to reflect my own needs and aesthetic. The photographs my mother had given me hung alongside ones I'd taken myself of the lake in various seasons, creating a visual timeline that honored both heritage and present reality. Zoe's wedding in June brought a weekend of joyful celebration at Cape Cod, where I stood proudly as her man of honor in a suit that complemented but didn't match the bridesmaids' dresses, a compromise we'd laughingly negotiated. My parents attended as my guests, my mother remarkably restrained in her observations about the unconventional ceremony, genuinely happy to share in the celebration without attempting to control or critique it. As summer stretched into perfect New England days of lake swimming and evening barbecues, I hosted a series of gatherings at the lake house. Friends from Boston, colleagues from Horizon, Noah and Mia, even my parents for a 4th of July weekend that went surprisingly well. "You've created something special here," my father observed as we stood on the dock watching fireworks across the lake. "Not just the renovation, but the whole atmosphere." "Thanks," I said, genuinely appreciative of his recognition. "It feels right." "Your grandfather would be proud," he added, then hesitated before continuing. "And I am too, Ethan. Not of what you've achieved, though that's impressive, but of who you are. How you've handled everything, the revelations about your mother's behavior, the difficult conversations, the rebuilding of relationships on more honest terms. It can't have been easy." "It wasn't," I acknowledged. "Still isn't sometimes, but it's worth it." He nodded, understanding. "Your mother is different now. Not perfect, neither of us is, but genuinely changed in ways I wouldn't have thought possible. The mortgage was a catalyst," I reflected. "But she did the actual work of changing." With proper motivation, he smiled slightly. "Nothing like having your adult son buy your house out from under you to inspire some serious self-reflection." We laughed together, the humor possible now that the raw wounds had begun to heal, the shared acknowledgement of just how unusual our family's path to authenticity had been. Later that week, after everyone had returned to their respective homes and routines, I received an unexpected visitor. The security system alerted me to a car coming up the driveway, a rental by the gal. Looks of it. Curious, I stepped onto the porch to find Diane Miller emerging from the vehicle, looking only slightly older than I remembered from our meeting during the confrontation with my mother. "Ethan," she smiled warmly. "I hope you don't mind the surprise visit. I'm passing through on my way to Montreal and couldn't resist seeing this place your mother has talked about." "She mentioned you'd reconnected," I said, welcoming her inside. "It's good to see you again." Over iced tea on the porch overlooking the lake, Diane shared her perspective on my mother's transformation. "It's remarkable, truly. We've had several long conversations about the past. Not just how she treated you, but how she managed all her relationships. There's a self-awareness now that was completely absent before." "She's put in the work," I acknowledged. "It hasn't been a straight line, but the change is real. Which is why I wanted to see you," Diane said, setting down her glass. "To give you something." She retrieved an envelope from her purse and handed it to me. Inside were photographs, me at perhaps 5 or 6 years old, playing with another child I vaguely recognized. "My daughter, Rebecca," Diane explained, seeing my confusion. "You two were inseparable before your mother decided I was a negative influence and ended our family's friendship. She was concerned I encouraged too much unstructured play and not enough academic focus, even for kindergartners." I studied the images with a strange blend of sadness and curiosity, evidence of another connection severed by my mother's control, another authentic relationship sacrificed to the altar of appearances. "Rebecca asked me to give you her contact information," Diane continued, indicating a note with the photos. "She's a pediatric psychologist now, specializing in helping children navigate family dynamics, much like what you experienced. Your story, what your mother shared of it during their recent lunch, resonated deeply with her work. The synchronicity struck me, how the very wounds inflicted by my mother's control might have shaped this woman's path toward helping others heal from similar experiences. I'll reach out to her," I promised, genuinely intrigued by this connection to a past I barely remembered. After Diane left, I sat with the photographs, adding them to the growing collection that represented a more complete, more honest version of my life story. Each image reclaimed, Each relationship restored or newly formed was another step toward wholeness. Not perfection, but authentic integration of all the pieces of myself, even those that had been rejected or hidden away. That evening, I called Rebecca Miller, curious about the childhood friend I couldn't remember. Our conversation lasted for hours, ranging from shared memories, mostly hers, as mine of that time were fragmented, to professional interests, to philosophical discussions about family healing. "Would you consider speaking to one of my support groups?" she asked toward the end of our call. "Your experience, especially the reconciliation after confrontation, could be really valuable for adult children still struggling with controlling parents." "I'm not sure I'm qualified," I hesitated. Our situation was pretty unique. "That's precisely why it's valuable," she countered. "Most resources focus either on complete estrangement or on pretending the damage never happened. Your family found a middle path. Acknowledgement of harm followed by genuine change and rebuilding. That's rare, and people need to hear it's possible." I agreed to think about it, surprised by how the most painful chapter of my life might become a resource for others facing similar struggles. The idea of transforming private pain into public purpose resonated with something my grandfather had written in his journal about authentic living. True authenticity isn't just being honest about who you are. It's using that truth to connect meaningfully with others. As autumn painted the trees surrounding the lake in brilliant reds and golds, I made two significant decisions. First, I accepted Rebecca's invitation to speak to her support group, a small step toward sharing my experience in service of others' healing. Second, I invited my mother to visit the lake house alone. No father, no brother, no buffer of other people to diffuse the intensity of our still evolving relationship. She arrived on a perfect October afternoon, the lake a mirror reflecting endless blue sky and flame-colored foliage. I watched her approach the house, noting how different she looked from the perfectly coiffed, perpetually controlling mother of my youth. Her hair showed natural gray now instead of expensive highlights, her clothing comfortable rather than strategically impressive, her smile genuine when she saw me waiting. "This is stunning," she said, gesturing to the autumn landscape. I'd forgotten how beautiful fall is in New England. We spent the day hiking trails my grandfather had mapped decades earlier, my mother surprisingly willing to get muddy shoes and wind-blown hair in pursuit of the perfect vista. That evening, as we sat before the fireplace with glasses of wine, a comfortable silence stretched between us, perhaps the first truly comfortable silence we'd ever shared. "I've been thinking about your grandfather a lot lately," she said finally, "about how wrong I was about him, about his influence on you." I waited, allowing her space to continue at her own pace. "I was threatened by your connection with him," she admitted, "by how easily you were yourself with him, when I could only seem to relate to you through expectations and performance. I was jealous, if I'm being honest." The acknowledgement struck me deeply, not because it was surprising, but because it represented a level of self-awareness that would have been impossible for her before. "I found his journal," I said, gesturing to where it sat on the bookshelf. "The one he kept about me from birth until just before he died." Her eyes widened slightly. "May I see it?" I hesitated only briefly before retrieving it, something in me still protective of this pure connection that had survived her interference. But part of healing was taking calculated risks, allowing new possibilities for relationship where walls had previously been necessary. She accepted the journal, with reverent hands, opening to a random page and reading silently, tears gathering in her eyes. "He saw you so clearly," she whispered finally, "in ways I was too blinded by my own issues to manage. He tried to protect me from the pressure to perform," I acknowledged, "but family dynamics are complicated." She recognized her father-in-law's own words reflected back to her, nodding slowly. "Yes, they are. And I made them more complicated with my need for control, my insecurities, my fear." Fear of what? I asked gently. Of not being enough, she said simply. Of you realizing I wasn't perfect, didn't have all the answers. Of you rejecting me if I couldn't maintain the facade of having everything together. She closed the journal carefully. So I rejected authentic connection first, controlled everything I could, created an environment where only achievement and appearance mattered because those were things I could measure and manage. The insight was profound, not just her recognition of the behavior patterns that had damaged our relationship, but her understanding of their root causes. I'm not saying this to excuse anything, she added quickly, just to explain. The work I've been doing in therapy has helped me see these patterns more clearly. I appreciate that, I said sincerely. Understanding the why matters, even though it doesn't erase the impact. She nodded, relieved at my response. Exactly. The impact was real, and I'm so sorry for it, Ethan. For all the ways I made you feel you had to earn love that should have been freely given. We talked late into the night, more openly than ever before, about her own childhood with critical parents, about my struggles with perfectionism and fear of failure, about the gradual process of healing we were both undertaking. It wasn't a magical resolution of all that had come before, but it was honest engagement with our shared history and possible future. The next morning, as I prepared to drive her to the airport, she handed me a small package. Something I've been working on in my pottery class, she explained, slightly embarrassed. It's not perfect by any means. Inside was a ceramic mug, slightly lopsided but glazed in the deep blue-green of the lake in summer. Pressed into the clay before firing were tiny impressions. A leaf, a pine cone, stones from the lake shore. I collected those during our walk yesterday, she explained. I thought it might be nice to have something imperfect but meaningful for your morning coffee here. The gift represented so much, her embrace of imperfection, her attention to what actually mattered to me, her willingness to create something authentic rather than purchasing something impressive. I was genuinely touched. I love it, I said truthfully. Thank you. As we drove to the airport, autumn colors blurring past the windows, she asked hesitantly about my plans for the holidays. I was thinking of hosting Thanksgiving at the lake. House, actually, I replied. Noah and Mia already said they'd come, and I could fly you and Dad up if you're interested. We'd like that very much, she said, then added with a small smile, I promise not to take over the kitchen or criticize your table settings. Appreciate that, I laughed. Though feedback on the turkey would be welcome. First time attempting. 1. At the departure terminal, our goodbye was brief but genuine. A hug that felt natural rather than performative, a promise to talk soon that we both knew would be kept. Driving back to the lake house alone, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. From that devastating comment at graduation, I expected more from you. What a disappointment. To this weekend of authentic connection spanned a decade of pain, confrontation, and ultimately, transformation. The mortgage I'd purchased in a moment of justified anger had become not a weapon, but a catalyst, forcing a reckoning that might otherwise never have come, creating space for truth that had allowed genuine healing to begin. Back at the lake house, I placed my mother's handmade mug on the kitchen counter beside my grandfather's coffee cups, the imperfect new alongside the weathered old, different expressions of connection to this place and to me. I ran my fingers over the impressions of lakeside treasures pressed into the clay, feeling the tangible evidence of my mother's effort to see, to understand, to connect with what actually mattered to me rather than what fit her predetermined vision. That evening, as sunset painted the autumn lake in shades of fire, I sat on the dock my grandfather had built decades earlier, thinking about the words he'd written in his journal, that the lake had always had a particular effect on those ready to listen to it. Perhaps that effect was simply the space to be authentic, to let the facades and performances fall away, to recognize what was genuinely valuable beneath the accumulated layers of others' expectations. I sipped coffee from my mother's imperfect, meaningful mug, watching the light change on the water, feeling oddly complete. Not because everything was resolved or perfect, life rarely offers such neat conclusions, but because I had found a way to integrate all the pieces of my story: the pain and the healing, the rejection and the reconciliation, the performance, and the authenticity. The mortgage deed that had once represented power and confrontation now symbolized something entirely different. The moment when truth finally took precedence over facade, when the careful story my mother had constructed about our family gave way to honest acknowledgement of both harm and possibility. 10 years after being called a disappointment at my graduation, I had discovered that the greatest gift wasn't revenge or even vindication, but the freedom to build a life on authentic terms, and, unexpectedly, the opportunity to welcome my mother into that authenticity if she was willing to do the work required to enter it. As darkness settled over the lake, stars emerging in the clear autumn sky, I thought about the support group I'd agreed to speak to, other adult children of controlling parents, seeking their own paths to healing. I couldn't offer them a perfect resolution or a guaranteed method, but I could share the messy, imperfect truth of my own journey. That confrontation without compassion leads only to more pain. That healing requires both accountability and the possibility of grace. That authentic life emerges not from the absence of struggle, but from its honest integration. I pulled my grandfather's journal from my pocket, turning to the final entry he'd written before his death, finding new meaning in his words. I leave this house to him with hope that someday he'll break free completely, build a life that reflects his true self rather than others' expectations. The lake has always had that effect on those who are ready to listen to it. He had been right. The lake house hadn't just been a piece of property or even a connection to him. It had been the key to a different way of being, a place where authenticity could finally take root and flourish. 10 years after my mother called me a disappointment, at my graduation, I had bought her mortgage, and everything had indeed changed. Not in the way I'd initially imagined when planning that confrontation, but in a deeper, more lasting way than simple revenge could ever have accomplished. The facade had cracked, letting the light of truth illuminate what lay beneath. And in that light, both my mother and I had begun to see each other, and ourselves, more clearly than ever before. Not perfect, not complete, but authentic. And in that authenticity lay the possibility of genuine connection, genuine healing, genuine life. I raised my imperfect, meaningful mug to the stars above the lake, a silent toast to journeys completed and journeys just beginning, to disappointments transformed into catalysts, to mortgages that purchased not just property but possibility, to everything that had changed and everything that still might. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.